He was a convicted murderer who became a celebrated writer, a symbol of rehabilitation, and a monster hiding in plain sight. Johann Jack Unterweger wasn't just a killer, he was a chameleon, a literary darling turned serial predator. Today, I'm diving into 10 disturbing facts about one of the most baffling cases in modern criminal history. This is the twisted tale of Jack Unterweger. If you enjoy these kinds of videos, please subscribe to Darklight Archives for more eerie, true stories. Johann Jack Unterweger was born on August 16, 1950, in Judenburg, Austria. He later claimed in interviews and his autobiography that his mother had worked as a sex worker. However, Austrian judicial records show no such convictions or charges, and his mother firmly denied the claim, accusing her son of slandering her to boost book sales. He was raised in part by his maternal grandfather in rural Carinthia, who Unterweger's claimed was violent and abusive, though there's no verified evidence to support this. Unterweger's criminal history began early. At 16, he was first convicted for theft. Between 1966 and 1974, he was convicted 16 times. Most of these were for theft and burglary, but in the early 1970s, his offences escalated to include pimping, sexual assault, and several counts of physical assault. His behaviour became increasingly violent, culminating in 1974, when he was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of 18-year-old Margaret Schaefer, whom he strangled manually, then tied her own bra around her neck after death. While serving his life sentence, Unterweger began writing poems, short stories, plays, and an autobiography titled Either Purgatory or The Trip to Prison, which gained national attention in Austria. Austrian intellectuals, journalists, and artists saw him as a success story of prison rehabilitation. Prominent figures such as author Elfriede Jelinek and editor Günther Nenning advocated for his release, believing his literary talent showed he had reformed. Due to growing public pressure and the belief that he had been rehabilitated, Unterweger was released on parole in May 1990 after serving 15 years of a life sentence. Within months of his release, sex workers in Austria began turning up dead. Between 1990 and 1992, at least 11 women were murdered in Austria, Czechoslovakia, and the United States. The similarities were chilling. Most were sex workers, and many were strangled with their own bras, just like his 1974 victim. Despite this, Unterweger quickly became a media personality. He gave lectures, appeared on talk shows, and even worked as a journalist. Ironically, he was hired by an Austrian magazine to report on crime and prostitution in Vienna, and later in Los Angeles, the same cities where sex workers were being murdered. In 1991, Unterweger travelled to Los Angeles under the guise of researching a story on sex work and American policing. While there, 3 sex workers, Shannon Exley, Irene Rodriguez, and Peggy Booth, were murdered. All were found strangled and dumped in remote areas, and 2 were tied with their own bras. Unterweger had been riding along with LAPD officers during his trip, supposedly shadowing them for a journalistic assignment. The FBI would later identify eerie similarities between the US murders and those in Austria, ultimately helping link the crimes across continents. Austrian police, suspicious of Unterweger, placed him under surveillance in 1991. They observed that he frequently contacted sex workers and was often the last known person seen with several of the victims. As suspicion grew, he fled Austria with his girlfriend Bianca Mrák, travelling through Switzerland and France before eventually arriving in Miami, Florida. On February 27, 1992, US Marshals arrested him in Miami. He was later extradited to Austria to stand trial. Unterweger's trial began in 1994 in Graz, Austria. The case included evidence from multiple countries, phone records, fibre and hair analysis, travel documents, and witness testimony linked him to the murders. He was charged with 11 murders in total, 7 in Austria, 3 in the United States, and 1 in Czechoslovakia. However, due to jurisdictional and evidentiary constraints, he was convicted of 9 of them. On June 29, 1994, the jury found him guilty and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Just hours after his sentencing, Unterweger was found dead in his cell. He had hanged himself using a rope fashioned from shoelaces and the waistband of his prison trousers. He had tied the noose using the same knot that was used on many of his victims, a grim and calculated final act. His suicide occurred before the legal appeals process could begin, which under Austrian law at the time meant his conviction technically had not yet become final. Unterweger's case caused a national scandal in Austria. It raised serious questions about the parole system and how easily public and media opinion could sway legal decisions. Many of those who once championed his release, including prominent writers and political figures, later expressed regret and shock. His case became a cautionary example in criminology courses and criminal justice debates across Europe. Criminal psychologists later assessed Unterweger as having traits of narcissistic and antisocial personality disorders. He was charismatic, articulate, and highly manipulative. He reportedly studied Freud and Jung in prison and used psychological terminology to present himself as insightful and reformed. In reality, he was using his charm and intellect to manipulate public perception while continuing his crimes in secret. Unterweger's method of killing became one of the key forensic connections in the case. Multiple victims were strangled with their own bras, and the knot used was unusually complex, consistent across different crime scenes. This disturbing signature helped tie together murders that took place across borders and languages, ultimately exposing the scope of his crimes. Johann Jack Unterweger was a killer who convinced an entire nation that he had been redeemed, only to exploit that trust to continue his spree across continents. His case is a chilling reminder that talent is not the same as transformation. No amount of eloquence can mask true pathology. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more deep dives into the darkest corners of history.